All right, welcome to GothCast, episode 23. I'm Dr. Sanders.
This is Robbie Gore.
And today we're going to be talking about pretty much one of the biggest bands you could talk about when you are referring to goth music. But, oh wait, they're not really a goth band.
Yeah, so we're talking about Joy Division today. And Joy Division are a post-punk band who really came out after the fallout of punk. They were influenced by groups like the Sex Pistols and the Clash and bands of that nature. And after those bands kind of failed and left popularity or the mainstream, what you were left with was a lot of bands who had been influenced by this idea that you no longer had to produce records that necessarily catered to a broad audience, that you could do something that was specific or artistic, essentially breaking kind of the boundaries of music. And that's kind of what post-punk is about. And the sound that Joy Division would shape is kind of the sound that would influence many gothic bands to come.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, one of the reasons, we feel really compelled to discuss them. Not only do we really like them, but for not being a directly gothic rock band, it's pretty much as close as you could possibly be with Joy Division.
Yeah, especially Ian Curtis's vocals, I feel like, are so influential in what would be goth music.
Oh, absolutely. Just their sound is so dark, and gothic rock wasn't really a defined genre at the time. It was really close, okay? So really, really close. Unknown Pleasures 1979, and Bauhaus would really come to release what many consider one of the first, holy gothic rock albums in 1980, and it was really established fully in the 80s.
Yeah.
But a lot of the gothic rock bands who would go on to release these amazing albums were post-punk bands before. Susie and the Banshees we talked about.
Definitely.
The Cure, obviously. So a lot of these people came from not only punk rock, but then post-punk, and then went on to make some amazing gothic rock albums. But Joy Division, most people consider as just post-punk, but they're so influential to gothic music that, we can't help but talk about them.
Yeah, and at this point in the history of music, it's unlikely that you're not going to hear Joy Division played at a goth club, or that you're not going to see some Joy Division t-shirts. They've just become a big part of the community.
Yeah, that's one of the things I want to talk about briefly is, we do know that in a way, Joy Division's obviously Unknown Pleasures t-shirt and logo, a lot of people feel has been abused or overused in a lot of ways, because there's all these parodies of it. There's you can find it at pretty much any, basic retail store. It's essentially like the AC/DC shirt of goth bands, if that makes sense. I think it's kind of like, if you're even sort of into rock and roll, you can maybe find like an AC/DC's Back in Black shirt. They have it maybe everywhere, or maybe like a Led Zeppelin shirt. And I feel like Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures is kind of that equivalent, where if you're not even really into the band, you might be picking it up because I know this one song or something, because it's so available. It's so many of them out there.
Yep.
It's crazy to think how many people have kind of riffed on the Unknown Pleasures thing. You can find ones where it's like a cat pulling at the waves.
Yep.
Well, a really famous example is Disney released a Mickey Mouse t-shirt of Unknown Pleasures.
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah. And it was recalled soon after, and they actually went for a lot of money on eBay and everything. But yeah, sure enough, there was a Disney t-shirt that was Unknown Pleasures and had the Mickey Mouse head in the middle. It's crazy to think just how insanely popular this design is, and how much the idea of Joy Division, or some of what they've done, how far it reaches. It's really insane. And I think that's why, actually, in a lot of ways, a lot of people who listen to a lot of gothic music, sometimes they get sick of Joy Division, or they get sick of seeing that shirt, or they get sick of people saying oh yeah, I love goth music, I love Joy Division,
Yeah.
And it's kind of become one of those groaning moments for people. I know people who are literally sick of the idea of Joy Division just because of that.
It's kind of like indie people talking about how much they love the Smiths.
Oh man, I love the Smiths, so don't even go there. But
I'm not saying they're a bad band. I'm just saying that hipster culture is totally picked them up. Yep.
Yeah, that's really true. And I definitely think that that's a very similar argument for that, of why some people feel maybe burnt out on them sometimes.
Yep.
But that doesn't change how great their music is. I want to make that clear. But I thought it was really important to mention because that's a huge thing that I see happen all the time now. Is just the super oversaturation of their image.
Definitely.
Especially Love Will Tear Us Apart.
Yeah.
But we're going to get to all that and more. But first, we're going to talk about their first album, Unknown Pleasures.
Yeah, so Unknown Pleasures was released in 1979.
Mm-hmm.
It's their first studio album. And they had an EP before that, which we'll get to.
Yeah.
It's definitely kind of a different sound. But Unknown Pleasures is really kind of their first solidified release where they have this very dark, kind of gloomy atmosphere to their music.
Yeah. And it is a very unique and very powerful sound. And like you're saying, there was an EP before this, and we will talk more about it, but Joy Division was basically just a punk band before this, in the year before this. I mean, just a straightforward kind of like Sex Pistols knockoff.
Definitely. Well, they were actually formed after Bernard Sumner and Hook went to see the Sex Pistols. Mm-hmm. They decided they wanted to start a punk band, and pretty much everything kind of just spiraled from there. Started finding members. Eventually, they settled on Ian Curtis for vocals, simply because they liked him. It wasn't even like a question of whether or not he could sing. And it turned out that he, would be like this monumental singer for music and post-punk music.
Got lucky.
And Joy Division was actually kind of upset with the way the Unknown Pleasures was mixed because they felt it took away from their raw, gritty sound.
Yeah, that's actually why I wanted to mention that, that they have been a punk band before because, yeah, they were very dissatisfied with the way this album sounded. And while everyone pretty much loves the way this album sounds, or a lot of people, I love the way this album sounds. I think it's perfect. There's heavy use of reverb. There's kind of a really strange combination of accessible, almost like disco-like drums or like dance kind of beat drums and like a really interesting guitar work.
Yep.
They were not happy with it because they had come from, liking punk rock and the really in-your-face 4x4 type of music, and this album has a lot of space on it.
It definitely does.
Yeah, it's a very interesting use of timing and mixing to make an album very unique.
This is one of those albums where you could definitely mix the tracks in a different manner and almost get an entirely different album sound out of it. Like a huge part of this album sound is the reverb that they use and like the way certain things are EQ'd. The guitars are very dry, but there's reverb to give them space and all these things that add like a certain element to this, what would become kind of like the post-punk sound.
Yeah, and just talking about some of the songs, because man, we could talk about the sound forever, but we can use things, songs as an example. Just right off the bat, the opener, Disorder, one of the most popular songs that they've ever would release, and it's the opener of this album, and it's amazing. I mean, it has this very danceable kind of rhythm to it, even though it's a very heavy kind of song. Lyrically, this song and this whole album is extremely heavy. Like,
yeah, there's very dark lyrics and kind of like a very dark overtone to the music itself. Yet it's very melodic in nature and very danceable. I feel like that was one of the things that a lot of post-punk bands latched onto from punk music was the shift back to songwriting, because in the 1970s, you had had this huge focus on instrumentation and musicianship and being a virtuoso. Mm-hmm. And punk music kind of tore that down and let bands just be bands again and focus on writing good songs.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's really where they excelled. I mean, I will say a lot of this stuff is not super complicated in terms of a musical standpoint.
Yeah.
But it's really, really well executed. And I think Disorder is a good example of that. It's a very simple song. And if you break it down into parts, it's only like, I think, a total of 3 parts.
Yeah.
And it's just done really well. In fact, I think one of the best parts of Joy Division is the way that the instrumentation works together, because the bass is done in a very, very different way, and almost in a way that almost no other band does.
I definitely agree with that. I think they were the first band to really kind of pioneer a sound that was primarily driven by bass. Now, you had like funk groups who were very bass oriented, but this is the very first rock band whose like main sound is driven by the bass and the drums, and guitar is there for atmosphere. Whereas a lot of other bands, it's kind of the reverse.
Yeah, just like because Hook and Morris, they just really that's a bassist and drummer.
Yep.
They just like really, I don't know, they gel in a really cool way, and it's so unique. Like Hook tends to be all over the fretboard when playing bass. I mean, he jumps around like crazy, and he said that this was because he didn't really have good equipment, so he had to kind of play the higher notes to make it louder and more audible so he could hear it. And this is a perfect example. In fact, at the end of Disorder, one of the things I like is that they seem to kind of just play whatever at the end of the song. Like they kind of just seem like they're just hitting their instruments a little bit.
Yeah.
I just like that.
No, I totally agree. But even throughout the song, the bass line is constantly changing octaves and, maybe adding in the third instead of going to the fifth. And there's lots of experimentation with the bass line. It's not just a straightforward, like, chugging, like dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. And then, of course, after that, we have Day of the Lords. Great song. And this is really where you start to learn that this album has actually a lot of really catchy songs. And that's super awesome because they're still really aggressive. They're still really dark.
Yeah.
But they're really catchy. Like, Day of the Lords is an insanely catchy song. Not for necessarily the vocals only, in the terms of the guitar work, in terms of just the melodies. Something you can hum. And there's a lot of songs like that on here. I mean, even Candidate is like that. But, of course, Shadow Play, She's Lost Control.
Yeah.
All these songs are really, really catchy. And that's just something I think is so strange about this album. I'll admit, I was kind of sick of Joy Division at some points, but then when you come back to these albums, you're just like, man, like these songs are so good.
Yeah, it's funny. I almost had like a little bit of hesitance about this episode because it'd been so long since I listened to Joy Division, and I was used to kind of feeling burnt out on them. But there'd been a lot of space since I'd, listened to Unknown Pleasures or Closer, and listening back to them again, I was kind of just reminded of how good these albums were and still are, and why I like them in the first place, and why they still deserve merit.
I also think that a lot of people have an idea of, Joy Division's music because of, the main single, Love Will Tear Us Apart, which, by the way, isn't on this album. A lot of people associate Love Will Tear Us Apart with this album.
Yeah, it's actually a single.
It's not actually on this album. In fact, it was not on either one of the albums that they released while they were still together.
Nope.
It was a separate single, and we'll talk about a release that actually has them all. But for this one, I actually like that there is some variety on this album. You have these very upbeat, maybe a little more aggressive songs, like Disorder, or Day of the Lords, or even Shadow Play, and definitely She's Lost Control. But you have these kind of relaxing ones, like New Dawn Fades, I feel like is a really relaxing song.
Definitely.
And, although it's really dark, I find it really, really relaxing. And even Insight, it's a little repetitive, but it's really good, and it kind of switches it up. But I think the perfect example of a song that's influential to a certain genre, I think, is I Remember Nothing, the last song on the album.
That's actually one of my favorite songs on the album.
I feel like the way that this song is, it definitely probably had some influence on industrial music.
Yep.
And it's really simple. It's a great closer. It's super powerful. It's more about the emotion put through it and all the sounds and everything that they've done with it. I think it definitely probably influenced some people who went on to make industrial music a thing.
I definitely agree. I think what this album does really well is it's a very consolidated, concise, very well executed album. There's not a lot of songs on here that I feel like drag. There's definitely lots of catchy songs, and the album clocks in at 40 minutes, 39 to be exact, but a 40-minute album. It's not a terribly long album, and I think that's because they spent time recording material and making sure they picked the right songs for the album and getting the right sound for the album. Mm-hmm. And it's really a good example of when things go right in the studio.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy that the band hated it.
Ian Curtis later talked about how, they were kind of mistaken in thinking that it was poorly mixed. He just, basically admitted that they were just used to being more raw and more punk, and that they didn't realize what they had their hands on at the time.
We're actually going to see this again with their next album, which is kind of crazy that they still didn't
Yeah.
really feel like captured it. But for Unknown Pleasures, it's something I obviously recommend. And even if you're sick of listening to songs, a lot of people are really sick of listening to these ones. I can't not recommend it. As somebody who has been sick of Unknown Pleasures, it's something that I just can't not recommend. I mean, it's super classic. I mean, that album cover is, yes, it's everywhere. Okay.
Yeah.
It is what it is, but that doesn't take anything away from these songs and how amazing they are. And, sitting down and listening to this from beginning to end again, it really reminded me of just how great this album is. I mean, it definitely seems like they kind of struck the perfect middle ground between aggression and moodiness and introversion and extroversion, and it just is hard to explain just what they captured in this album.
Yep.
And Ian Curtis's voice is pretty unique. So
yeah, very
it's always
unique.
good.
Which is funny because at one point they had to have a backup singer on tour with them because Ian Curtis's seizures had got so bad. But it's hard to think that they could find anyone who could do Ian Curtis's vocals.
Yeah, no kidding. So yeah, do you have any closing thoughts on Unknown Pleasures?
I guess I would just kind of like to reiterate that I think a lot of people, like we've talked about, kind of shy away from this album because it's an album that's heavily talked about, heavily discussed already. We see it all the time in movies and media. It's definitely available, and most people are exposed to Joy Division, whether they're into goth music or post-punk music, or whether they're into it or anything at all. They're usually going to see it. But I definitely recommend people give it another listen. Maybe take a break from listening to Love Will Tear Us Apart and, then go back to that album. And I think you might find some things in there that you had maybe missed or forgotten about. Or if you haven't heard it for some reason, I find that very hard to believe. I definitely recommend that you check it out. I think that pretty much sums it up.
Okay. All right, this is going to be our still not renamed news segment.
Yep, basically just random gothic stuff.
Yeah, basically stuff probably interests us this week.
That may or may not directly be related to goth, but we enjoy it.
Yeah. So, yeah. One of the things I want to follow up on is the Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children movie. I've praised this book series a lot. I really like the book series for this, and Tim Burton is directing the movies. And, of course, we all know that with adaptations, Tim Burton can go into some pretty weird places. So
he likes to take some risks, shall we say.
And so there have been pretty good movies, I think. Sleepy Hollow is an adaptation of a story. And obviously he remade Willy Wonka, which is pretty bad. But
of course, Alice in Wonderland.
Okay. I get it. But Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, I hope it's really good. And got a release date for September 30th this year, so that's pretty cool, 2016.
Yep.
And I'm looking forward to it. Like, I could say I'm honestly looking forward to it because I love the book so much. I really hope it isn't bad. I know I said it last time, but I just really hope that it's good. And
I hope so too, because I'm going to be honest, and I probably won't read the books. So, but I will be seeing the movie because it's Tim Burton, and I'm not going to not go see it.
Yeah, it'd be weird if it becomes a franchise because there is 3 books.
Yep.
And while I don't think the second book is as good, I'll be perfectly honest. I think the first book is amazing. I think the second book is kind of went some places I wasn't too happy with, and I haven't finished the third one yet, so I don't want to give you a full review on that because these books are really important to get to the end. I really hope that this one's good, and if it is good, then I hope they make a sequel. But I know Tim Burton never really does sequels. The only time I think he's ever done has been Batman, and that I think it was more like the studio kind of wanting him to do it because the first one was a success.
Yep.
So, I just wanted to give an update on that. Another movie news is Chucky 7 is probably going to be made, and I thought that was just something that was really funny.
Yeah. So if you're a Chucky fan, you can look forward to that.
I think the first Child's Play is okay. Of course, Bride of Chucky was really big movie when that came out. I don't know why it was so huge, but I remember that being a gigantic movie at the time.
Yeah, Bride of Chucky was pretty big. I remember I still see it play on the TV all the time.
Yeah, Child's Play. Oh yeah, Child's Play like is licensed out like crazy because it's not really one of those super gory horror movies.
Yeah.
So they can show it on TV a lot without editing an insane amount of stuff out. It's more just like really unnerving.
I'll say as a child, Chucky scared me a hell of a lot more than Jason or Freddy did.
Oh yeah, it was. Yeah, the Chucky was always like the scariest one to me, at least growing up.
Jason was almost kind of cool in a weird way.
Yeah, I like hockey.
Yeah, I do too.
So, and then what do you want to cover this week?
I've got more movie news. So, basically, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Alien series by Ridley Scott. We've got some classic, iconic movies in there. While they're not necessarily goth movies, I feel like a lot of people in the goth community are fans of those movies. Particularly, I think a lot of that is due to H.R. Giger's role in designing the art.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. So, a lot of gothic people definitely identify with H.R. Giger's art, and he had a huge role in those movies. So they've become a staple, an icon of not only perhaps goth film, but film in general. And I'm sure many of you know there was a unofficial prequel to, and I use the words unofficial prequel as quoted by Ridley Scott, prequel to the Alien series called Prometheus. There's going to be a sequel to that movie. It was going to be called Prometheus 2, but apparently Ridley Scott has decided that he will no longer deny claims that it is an Alien prequel and has just decided to call it Alien Covenant.
Yeah. And, honestly, I think that's the way to go. I mean, all anybody tried to do with Prometheus and the legacy of Prometheus will be that it doesn't link up well with Aliens.
Yeah.
And, I'm a gigantic fan of the Alien series. Anybody who has lived with me has known that because my go-to movie, like when I'm bored and I can't think of them, like one of the top 3 is Alien 1. And watching Prometheus, it's a beautiful movie, good special effects and everything, but it just was like all anybody tried to do was connect it to Aliens, and he like it's just really frustrating because he's like, oh, it's not really like a sequel. Oh, it's not really a prequel. It kind of is, but no, it's not really. And literally all anybody tried to do was connect it. That's all any review said.
Almost as bad as Werner Herzog saying that he's never heard of
Bad Lieutenant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. I was really looking forward to Prometheus. Pretty much anything Alien, I really get excited for. I think if it's Predator, it's okay.
Yeah, I'm not as huge a fan of crossovers, but yeah, definitely a big fan of the Alien series. And we have, a relatively close release date to look forward to. It's set to release in 2017, so it's not too far away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing what happens with it. Was Prometheus a perfect movie? No. I still definitely enjoyed it. Cinematography was beautiful, and I definitely look forward to see what Ridley Scott does with this movie.
That's like the most brutal scene, by the way. You know what I'm talking about.
I know what you're talking about.
Oh, my God.
I thought it was great, though.
I was in the theater that was, like, packed.
Yeah.
And it was, like, so realistic that I, like, got almost, like, nauseous during it. I was, like, all on top of everybody, and it was so gross. I'll always remember that, like, me being in theater being like, oh, man, I think I'm going to be sick. Because it wasn't like, I don't know, it wasn't like a slasher film where everything's just, like, spurting blood. It was, like, way more realistic and claustrophobic and a whole bunch of, yeah.
It's a very real representation of what you would do if you were impregnated by an alien in the future.
Yeah, who hasn't been there, right? And the last thing I want to talk about, and this is another one of my weirdo DVD things that I've run across, and I thought I would just throw in here. So I was perusing some store that has kind of like budget DVDs. Well, I guess they have regular DVDs too, obviously. And I ran across this Psycho, not really a box set. It's one of those things that has like 4 movies on, like, a collection, 4 great thrillers,
Yep.
And it was called the Psycho collection. And I was really intrigued because Psycho 4 was on it.
Yeah.
Now, most people don't even know that we're talking about the sequels to the original 1960 Alfred Hitchcock movie Psycho, right?
Yeah.
There are 3 sequels to it. Psycho 2, 3, and 4. And by the way, Psycho 4 is called The Beginning.
Yeah.
And there's also like a 1987 movie, like
Yep.
TV movie that was made. And I thought this would be interesting to talk about, just like briefly, because as far as I knew, Psycho 4 hadn't been released on DVD, but it turns out that the only way to get it on DVD is in these compilations. It doesn't have a standalone release on DVD.
That's funny.
And
That's probably because that's the only way they could get people to buy it.
yeah, because I remember years ago, it was only on VHS, and it was famous because it was only on VHS. Like, you couldn't get a
Yep.
copy of it on DVD unless you like found somebody who'd ripped it. And so, yeah, I found that out. I was like, if you want to get Psycho 4 or you want to have the complete Psycho collection, you need to buy one of the compilations that already has 2 and 3 in it. It's crazy. It's so weird. And another piece of trivia for this is, if anybody's seen Harold and Maude, the person who plays Norman Bates in the 1987 TV movie is played
Yep.
by Bud Cort, who plays Harold instead of Harold and Maude.
Really? That's funny.
Yeah, and it's...
I could see him being a Norman Bates character.
Oh, yeah, I know, and he plays it really well. In fact, it's just really hilarious because I started watching it, and by the way, the quality of the TV movie rip on here is not very good, but then again, it's coming from broadcast, probably like... It's probably come from like U-matic tape or something.
Mm-hmm.
I can't imagine that they have like any kind of film sources of it. But I was watching it and I was like, what? I was like, Bud Cort, why does it sound familiar? And I was like, and I started watching, I was like, oh my God, it's for Harold and Maude. Like, I just immediately recognized it. And yeah, so I thought that was really cool. I think, that's like 2 cult movies crossing over with one another, or like 2 things that people really enjoy. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I just thought that was pretty interesting. If you want to get Psycho 4, just buy some compilation that has a whole bunch of other crappy movies you don't want to watch. So that's our news stuff for this. I'm seriously, I know I say it every episode, but I'm going to rename this segment one time.
Sure you will, Donnie.
Okay, that's news. All right, now we're going to move on to 1 year later. It's going to be Closer.
Yep.
And by the way, I've heard some people call it Closer, and that is, as far as I know, that's not the correct way to say it. It's Closer. I get why people would think it was Closer because it was released after Ian Curtis's death, but it's actually Closer.
Yeah, it's definitely Closer.
Yeah, I just heard some people who talk about it. They're like, yeah, Closer is the thing, but I've even watched documentaries and they say Closer, so that's what I'm going with. But yeah, this is a very different album. From 1 year later. I mean, not the biggest change, but definitely has a lot of things going on that are way different from Unknown Pleasures.
Yeah, so, I mean, for one, you have even more studio processing going on. You have more studio effects, more reverb, choruses, things like that. And you have presence of synthesizers on the album.
And the first album had like a little bit of pianos, a little bit of that, but not very much.
Yeah, and it's definitely not like a real synthy kind of sound. It's just kind of a texturized piano thing thrown in there. But this album really kind of takes a step forward in the area of experimentation. And I feel like this album especially, as influential as the first album was, I kind of see this one as being maybe more reminiscent of what we would see with gothic rock or like new wave music or dark wave music and things like that.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that one because this album pushes it almost into a little bit of the more psychedelia too.
Yeah.
Which is what a lot of gothic bands would experiment with. And it has a very interesting mix of things in it. It is definitely not Unknown Pleasures 2.
Definitely not.
Yeah, they took it into a different direction, and I think, they make that very clear right from the moment the album starts.
Yeah.
While the first album started with Disorder, which kind of gave you an idea of what most of the album was going to be like, this one starts with Atrocity Exhibition, which has like this weird tribal drums and a lot of different things going on it.
Yeah.
It's a good song. It's a very unique one, but it just shows off this completely different side, and it probably gives a lot of people a very strange impression of what the album is going to be.
I definitely agree with that. I definitely think part of the shift in sound is due to the fact that when they went into recording Unknown Pleasures, they had pretty much written most of the material for the album before they went into the studio at all, and they were used to performing it. It was the material that they often played live. Mm-hmm. Whereas when they came in to record Closer, they wrote a lot of the material for the album within the studio itself. So that really kind of, I think, often lends itself to bands experimenting with sounds, because you kind of have the freedom to change things and play around, and you don't have like a year to make an album or something. You know, you're under budget restraints and you have to produce work. And, you know, in some bands that can be a negative thing, but I definitely think in this situation, I think it did them good.
One of the complaints I've heard from this album is that Ian Curtis's vocals don't really mix well with the songs. I mean, as well as they did with the last album.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of unfortunately have to agree with this at points. And this may be just because of the way that, you know, they were written or the key that they're in. But when you listen to songs like Isolation, which has a great, really, really like kind of early 80s keyboard sound, by the way, on that song.
Yep.
And it's pretty catchy. Yeah, his vocals seem a little out of place on this, you know, for the really, really poppy style. They try to mask it with like chorus and some effects. But yeah, you can tell it's a little bit clumsy in some ways.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I think part of that is important to note that Ian Curtis's condition while they were working on this album was not good.
No.
So everyone's pretty aware that Ian Curtis killed himself. You know, if you didn't know that, news flash, I guess.
Yeah.
However, I feel like not as many people are familiar with the reason why he killed himself. Yes, he struggled with depression, but a lot of that was due to medical problems. Ian Curtis had epilepsy and would suffer seizures throughout the tour. He would have mini seizures on stage constantly, and people thought it was part of his routine when he was actually just convulsing while trying to perform the songs. And he even had, I think, like 2 grand mal seizures while he was on tour. And for those of you who don't know, if you have a grand mal seizure, you're on the floor lying with foam coming out of your mouth and you got to be rushed off to a hospital.
That's a huge, I can't even imagine what that is like to deal with. Yeah, that'd probably drive anyone to consider what he did, just because it was probably unbearable. But yeah, when a lot of that affected this album, and this album came out after his death, but I think it was about 2 months later.
Yep.
And yeah, it's really sad, but you have songs in here that definitely reflect his state of mind. You know, you have The Eternal, which is such a sad sounding song. It's a great piano and a great guitar. They really mesh well together. I think it's one of the saddest songs that Joy Division ever wrote was The Eternal.
I would definitely agree with that. You know, obviously Isolation and Atrocity Exhibition are the big singles aside from Love Will Tear Us Apart, which is kind of came out between, you know, Unknown Pleasures and this album, which technically isn't part of either album.
Yeah.
Even though that's their biggest hit.
Yeah, it's basically the lead up to this one.
Yep, but you have some really good songs on here. I like this, like you mentioned, The Eternal's really good. I really like the song Heart and Soul.
Oh, that's a great one.
I really like the song A Means to an End.
Mm-hmm. That one's amazing.
Yeah.
It's like, there's so many good songs in here.
And that's one of the things that I have to say about Joy Division's albums. You know, there's not a ton of material there, but I think that the material that they released was really good and really well written. And it's unfortunate that people so often overlook them now because people might feel like they're a cliche or something. When I really feel like their material holds up.
I think it holds up surprisingly well.
Yeah.
And that may be because so many bands pull from Joy Division. You know, so many modern bands, especially, you know, like the indie kind of bands, pull from Joy Division sound because it is dark and kind of poppy, but of course they make it much more accessible nowadays whenever people pull from it. But I think with Closer, it shows a little bit more uniqueness, at least compared to, you know, people ripping them off, because I feel like people don't pull as much from Closer.
No, I think that people definitely gravitate more towards Unknown Pleasures. And while I feel like Unknown Pleasures perhaps maybe was mixed better, or, you know, like you said, the vocals might have sat better within the songs themselves, I kind of prefer Closer to Unknown Pleasures, just because I feel like it was a really cool step in a different direction for them. It wasn't a drastic change. They did not sound like Joy Division, but they definitely had pushed the boundaries of what they were doing. They'd introduced new instruments and new ways of mixing and new effects in the studio, and I enjoy all that. And I really feel like this is a really heartfelt album from Ian Curtis. I feel like his writing and his lyrics are so present on this album, and you can really feel the pain that he's going through.
Yeah. I gotta say, one of my favorite songs on this album is the closer, Decades.
Yeah.
Anything that has a mock harpsichord sound, I love. I just love harpsichords, the way they sound.
Yeah.
And I love the way the vocals sit on here. It's a multi-part song. It's so awesome.
I definitely agree with that.
One of the things I wanted to talk about with Joy Division, when I sat down and listened to pretty much everything that they've released, I really want to kind of put out there that I don't think Joy Division ever found what their defined sound was. And I know it's hard to imagine because so many people are like, you know, like Unknown Pleasures is like the best album ever, you know, like they probably would have done more albums like Unknown Pleasures. I really think that Joy Division had not found necessarily the sound that they were looking for yet. And that sounds crazy, right?
No, I get where you're coming from. Like I could see that just from listening to it, but even if you just go back and read interviews with them and stuff, you'll see them constantly talking about how they'd go into rehearsals and they wouldn't really talk about what they wanted the songs to sound like, and they would just kind of sit and mess around with things, and they wouldn't discuss it too much. They wouldn't really analyze it. They would just try and capture a feeling. And I think they were really just kind of searching for something, especially Ian Curtis.
Yeah. You got to think about it. 1978, they're pretty much still a punk band, right?
Yeah.
1979, they do Unknown Pleasures, which has this much more expansive sound than that.
Yeah.
And then they do Closer, which has even more of a push in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, seriously, if Joy Division had continued, it probably would have been a lot like the way a lot of goth bands were, where even like Bauhaus, they switched up what they were doing for every album until they kind of found their groove a little bit. Or like The Cure, which, by 2 or 3 albums in was when they started hitting their stride.
Yeah. And
I think that is probably what would have happened with Joy Division. They probably would have moved in a different direction even. And I think actually New Order, which all the members from Joy Division went on to form after Curse's death, I think that is a perfect example of probably where they were going to go eventually.
It's funny you should mention that, because I was actually going to bring that up, and that I think that New Order is definitely a good example of where Joy Division would have headed. It's definitely much closer to like kind of a goth sound. It's definitely a very new wave sound. You have lots of chorus on the guitars, lots of synths present, and just this very kind of post-punk new wave kind of sound that I feel like a lot of goth bands would kind of take and expand on and make a little bit darker perhaps, but I really feel like it was kind of the framework or the foundation for that kind of sound.
And that's really how I feel, is that they probably would have gone in that direction if they had been given time. But of course, with the end of Joy Division, you pretty much have as much music as you can, release.
Yeah.
And what we have is a whole, 3 very different releases. One EP that's way different than 2 similar yet different albums. And so I think probably they would have gone more with keyboards and more in that direction with, a lot of artists. And it's sad we didn't get to see really anything else from them.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. However, I will say, would I have liked to have seen more material from them? Is it tragic that Ian Curtis committed suicide? Sure. However, I don't feel that they went unnoticed, or that Ian Curtis and the band didn't get to leave their mark on music. I really feel like that band really left a huge imprint on music, and even if they had gone on to release 5 more albums, I still think that these albums would really be ones that people are talking about to this day.
Yeah, I totally agree. So that's Closer. It's a great album. I actually really recommend it. It's different than Unknown Pleasures, yet similar, but kind of has its own thing going on. It has a whole different feel than an album.
Yeah, I would say my take on Closer would be, or my recommendation for Closer would basically be that if you're familiar with Joy Division and you're perhaps a little burnt out on Unknown Pleasures, I feel like a lot of people haven't given Closer as much of a listen as they have to Unknown Pleasures, because Unknown Pleasures is the album that we see so often, the artwork that we see, and it's what people usually look up when they're checking out Joy Division. So I would suggest to people to really give Closer a chance. I feel like there's some really good material. I like both albums, but if I'm being 100% honest, if I have to choose which one I like more, I think I kind of like Closer. And that's not to say that Unknown Pleasures isn't a great album, because it definitely is. But I think I gravitate and can relate to the material on Closer a little bit more than I can with Unknown Pleasures.
I don't know. I think I'm still an Unknown Pleasures kind of guy.
Yeah.
I like Closer a lot. I like a lot of stuff on there, but for some reason Unknown Pleasures still on that one.
I mean, I have nothing bad to say about Unknown Pleasures. I think it's a great album. I just really enjoyed seeing things change on the second album.
It just gives me unknown pleasure listening to it.
I almost kind of wish that it would be released as like a double album sometimes.
I'm sure it probably is somewhere on a CD pack, but
probably.
Yeah, that's Closer. It's an amazing album. It's a great follow-up. It's just give it a listen, actually. I totally recommend it.
I definitely agree.
All right, now we're going to talk about something a little different, and this is probably something that not a lot of people are familiar with. Now, probably everyone's familiar with Unknown Pleasures. That's why we covered it first. It's their first album.
Yep.
And so Closer was their last official album as a band while Ian Curtis was alive. I mean, well, it was released after he was dead, after he committed suicide.
But they recorded it while he was alive.
Yeah. Let's go back a little bit. So we said on Unknown Pleasures that before they became like a post-punk band, they were pretty much a straightforward punk band. And that's very true. And in fact, there's a release of that kind of music with Joy Division. And it's an EP that was released in 1978, so the year before Unknown Pleasures.
Yep.
Called An Ideal for Living.
Yeah, so they had just changed their name to Joy Division.
Yeah, just changed the name. So they were Warsaw.
There was some confusion with another band who had a similar name. So they decided to name themselves Joy Division, ironically after how shall I put this?
I know exactly what you're going to say.
They're named after a prostitution ring that worked for the Nazis, basically.
Yeah, basically forced prostitution.
Yep.
And it was called the Joy Division.
Yep.
And so a lot of people actually saw them as maybe a tinge of sympathy for Hitler.
Yeah.
Because they're naming themselves Joy Division. And I know today that sounds ridiculous. Not a lot of people are familiar with that term.
Yeah.
But that's where it comes from. It comes from Nazis and this forced prostitution.
The album cover's kind of got a Nazi-ish looking kid on there.
Yeah, it's got that kind of look. And I'm surprised it wasn't a bigger controversy at the time. I could see it in maybe America or something like that, people not understanding it as much, but Joy Division is a reference to when Nazis were doing awful things, and it's something that I don't think a lot of people know about that name.
Yep.
But they had just changed their name to Joy Division, and they released this EP. It's called An Ideal for Living, and this is pretty much Joy Division as a punk band, but what most people are not familiar with, what most people don't know them as. Yeah,
and it should be also mentioned that this particular EP was not released on Factory Records, which was their main record label. This is prior to them signing with Factory Records, and it was released on the band's own label, Enigma. And it's definitely, you can hear that they're completely in control of their sound, because they were definitely a band that wanted to be a punk band, and I feel like they definitely got that out of this EP.
While I'm not the biggest fan of punk, I actually gotta say I did enjoy this album for what it was, and that's a pretty basic punk album. In fact, it's actually kind of catchy with some of the songs, and I like the aggression. Curtis's vocals are definitely different on this one. In fact, it's almost hard to recognize him.
They're very kind of in their developing stages. I don't think Ian Curtis really knew how he was going to sing or how to sing, really, because he had no formal background in singing. they pretty much just hired him because he was their friend and they liked him, so they went for it. And
Yeah.
it's not a bad EP. It's not a bad attempt at what they were doing. I would say that it's a pretty successful attempt at what they were doing. It's a punk EP, and it does so pretty well. Do I enjoy this EP as much as I enjoy their studio releases or their major studio albums? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I still think it's definitely a cool listen, and if it's something that you haven't come across by them yet, I would say, check it out. It's not a huge investment of your time. It's only 4 songs in the EP.
It's pretty generic. I'd say that if they had got on to do Unknown Pleasures and Closer,
Yep.
I don't think anybody was talking about this EP. I'll say that. Like, I don't think this is like one of those like, oh my gosh, like we've uncovered the best songs by Joy Division. I don't think it's that. I think it's good for what it is, but it's not breaking the mold of what was popular.
Definitely not. But, then again, they were a band who had pretty much just formed after seeing the Sex Pistols, and that's what they were going for.
Yep. Okay, so now we're going to kind of briefly talk about the compilations that have been released and the live albums. And the reason that we're even mentioning these, because, we don't normally mention compilations. We have done live albums with The Cure, but that's obviously because they're The Cure.
Yeah.
For Joy Division, a lot of actually the most popular songs have been released since their demise.
Definitely. They had recorded a lot of material, and like I said, I feel like they definitely made specific attempts to choose the right songs for each album that they released. So, there would be songs that were sometimes shelved, when they went into the studio. And with Ian Curtis's death and the band's career cut short, that kind of left Factory Records with the ability to, put out these songs and release things that they recorded that they might not have intended to release, or maybe would have released later, or would have been singles or EPs or...
Mm-hmm. So the first compilation that we have is called Still, released in 1981, so a year after Ian Curtis's death.
Yep.
And it honestly, I don't think is the best compilation, especially for the amount of singles and everything that they had.
Yeah.
So they had a lot of really popular singles. Obviously, Love Will Tear Us Apart. They had Transmission. And the single versions actually aren't present on this record. And I think that that's a total missed opportunity,
Yeah, well, I think where this record kind of fails is that, so it's a compilation record that's half kind of like shelved studio songs and then half singles that were recorded live. Mm-hmm. So it's half live album, half studio album.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do a compilation album, like, I feel like it's kind of weird to just throw in 8 live songs, with a bunch of studio songs.
Yeah, I agree with that. But this is one of the things that is to know is this is the recording of their last concert.
Yeah.
And that's like usually what most people want to hear. I'll say that the recording quality of the concert is not the best. It is like late 70s, early 80s sounding, and that it's kind of a flat mix, so there's not really a lot of bass. It's not like a super dynamic. You don't put it on and it like roars out of your stereo.
Definitely not.
It's kind of like a flat. And plus, this was obviously when Ian Curtis was struggling a lot with his life, and although the vocals are pushed pretty far forward in most of the live songs,
yep,
I think in Ceremony there's like a mixing issue that most people are pretty angry about, though. But most of the songs, they're pushed pretty far forward. And you can tell there's a little bit of something in his voice, like something a little, he's struggling a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
But they are really, really raw sounding. Like, if you thought the albums were too produced, the live albums are the way to go with him. And we're going to talk about quite a few different live releases. I still don't think this is, like, the best recordings for a lot of their songs.
Well, and it's kind of a weird mix because half of the album is live album material and the other half is studio material. I almost think it would have been smarter to release a compilation of just studio releases and then do a live album.
Yep. I totally agree. And being familiar with the singles and things that were released for them, I just am so lost as to why they chose the songs that they did. They have Dead Souls on here, which obviously is an amazing song.
Yeah.
Like, I love that song. And I think it is definitely deserves to be on here because it wasn't included on an album, and it's something that is nowadays one of their most famous songs. And You also have Glass on here, which was released in 1978, or at least recorded in 1978. But the other song that was recorded around that same time is a song called Digital.
Yeah.
And I love that song by Joy Division, but it's not on here. So they include Glass from, that was one of the first releases by Factory Records on them. But they don't include Digital, which I think is a better song, and I don't understand it.
Yeah, I think this is one of those situations where I don't know how involved the band was with compiling these songs for this particular release. And a lot of times when a record label is left to releasing material that, they own the rights to, record labels are good at a lot of things, but they're not producers, they're not musicians, they're executives and they're promoters. And so I feel like a lot of times if they're the sole people in charge of putting a release out, it kind of can go awry sometimes.
I think this is definitely one of those situations where it could have been a lot better, even from the time. If you think about what year it was, I think could have been a lot better of a release.
I definitely agree with that. Unfortunately, I don't know that I have much else to say about this album. There's, some material on here that's cool, but for the most part, it's not an album that I'd recommend, certainly not over other compilations or live albums.
I do recommend, obviously, Dead Souls on this, and if you want to hear what their last show was like, I think the last show is very, very interesting, if you're a fan of Joy Division, to listen to, because it's, literally, I think it's days before he committed suicide, and it's really, really kind of shows you the headspace that he was in. He seems kind of out of it a little bit at some points, and it's really, really interesting. And also, there's a version of Ceremony on here, which obviously, if you're familiar with New Order, that's a New Order song.
Yeah.
So, Ceremony is on here, and it's done with Joy Division.
Yeah, well, they probably wrote it while they were in Joy Division.
Yeah, I think it's one of the only songs that actually carried over to New Order, so it's pretty interesting. It's not the best recording of it, but it's an interesting kind of track.
I don't know why I just said they probably wrote it while they were with Joy Division. Obviously, they wrote it.
Yeah, probably wrote it while they were in Joy Division.
Like, definitely. Because it exists on Joy Division records.
Yeah. Maybe they went back and did it with Ian Curtis later. But yeah. So that's still is a pretty common album, actually, which is, I think it's probably because of the live album that's on it. I think a lot of people want to listen to that.
Yeah.
But it's honestly, for me, I don't think it's that great of a compilation. I think it could have been a lot better. But I get that, these things don't just happen. A lot of these reissues, or a lot of these things that are released posthumously, they kind of have some issues with legal rights or any kind of things like that.
Yeah.
So, not really recommended. It's kind of more of an interest piece.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if you're a huge Joy Division fan and maybe you want to hear something you haven't heard before or have something in your collection that's pretty rare, then maybe go check it out. But as far as just recommending the album goes, I can't say that I really do.
Yeah, that's still. And now on to something that I think is a lot better, and that is Substance. And this was years later.
Yes, this is 1988. And it's kind of a companion to a similar single compilation by the band that would come after Joy Division, New Order, which was also entitled Substance.
Yeah.
So we have Substance by Joy Division and Substance by New Order, which came out in kind of similar time frames. And yeah.
It's a little interesting. I don't know why they would do that. It's pretty confusing. But this, I actually recommend this one. And that's because this compiles basically everything that you would think would have been on Still. It's basically the singles that were released. So Love Will Tear Us Apart, Atmosphere. It even has Dead Souls, which means you don't have to get Still.
Yeah. And it has digital on it, which you complained about, still not having.
That's why I really actually recommend Substance. It compiles pretty much every other song that you would want from Joy Division onto an album.
Yeah. I think I pretty much have to agree with you. The biggest problems that I had with the last compilation was that, for the singles they compiled, there wasn't a ton of material that was very compelling to listen to, and the live recordings themselves aren't really that enjoyable for myself. And this is, much more of a straightforward just compilation album, of, singles and, just cool songs, and even some rare material, like Warsaw, which is from their EP where they're still a punk band. And I think this is a better compilation. And if you want something that's a little bit different in your Joy Division collection, that's something other than their 2 studio releases, I would definitely look for this particular compilation.
Yeah, I recommend this one. This is pretty much exactly what I want Still to be, and it's exactly what I want. So if you're making some CDs for your car, you want to go buy some albums for it, I recommend Unknown Pleasures, Closer, and this one as far as studio recordings go.
Yeah.
And that's maybe just because it's digital. I mean, like I said, I love that song. That's like one of my favorite Joy Division songs is digital.
It's a really good
and I was
song.
so mad that it's not on Still, because it seems like it should be. So, yeah.
At least we have another compilation that has both of them on there.
Yeah. It was like 1 million. No, don't even get me started on it.
I know.
Yeah. There's a lot of different compilations that include a lot of these songs. But as far as like earlier ones, I think that this is one of the more important ones. Like it's one that pretty much clears up everything that you would have wanted.
Yeah. I mean, it peaked at number 7 on the UK album chart. It was number 146 on the Billboard 200, which was the band's only chart appearance in the United States. So
Yeah.
This was actually kind of a big album for them, even though it was released posthumously.
Yeah. I recommend it, obviously. It has some substance to it.
That it does.
Substance is really the only other compilation that we're going to talk about, because there are a lot of other compilations like Best of New Order / Joy Division. There's like little tiny compilations of like Best Joy Division songs, and there's all these different ones. But
And it seems like they keep coming out.
yeah, it's one of those things. Like the Smiths have like 4 studio albums, and then they have like 4 greatest hits albums.
Yep.
Of those albums. So Joy Division doesn't have an insane amount of material to pull from, but yeah, they still keep making compilations with it, same material. But what we're going to talk about is 2 live albums that are officially released by the band, and or at least the remaining members, and they each have good things about them. I like one much better than the other, but the first one we're going to talk about is Preston 28 February 1980.
Yeah, so the album was released in 1999, not 1980. Recorded in 1980. Definitely kind of an early look into what their live performances are like. I guess it's not that early considering they already had one.
1980.
Yeah.
This album, I think, is a better example than what the live album that was on Still was.
Yeah, definitely.
I think this is a better example of what this band was like live. The biggest issue with this is the audio quality. It's in my opinion, I think it's really bad. Like
that's where I was going with this. Is it like, yes, does this perhaps have better material on it than Still had as far as live material goes? Is there maybe a better dynamic from the band? Yes, but it's just kind of hard to listen to.
Yeah, it's just really, really echoey and reverby. They're kind of known for that, but this example, it doesn't really mesh well with the kind of energy that's on this album as opposed to the way it does on their studio albums.
Yep.
I don't know what the source is for this. It's definitely like a soundboard recording.
Yeah.
But the vocals are kind of low in it, and it kind of just has like an overall really muddy sound to it.
It sounds like a really crappy sound guy mixed them.
Yeah. That's what really sucks about this. It's a great performance. I mean, it's probably one of the better performances, especially, how little time they were together. It's a great show of, that energy. But, yeah, I really don't recommend this one just because of the sound quality. I think it's really detracts from it for me.
Yeah, I definitely would say that, unfortunately, although it's a good performance, I don't recommend this album. I just don't, because you could easily find other live material by them, and this one is captured, unfortunately, very poorly.
Yeah, and speaking of an album that at least I think is better, and I'm probably going to butcher whatever the heck this title is. I'm very sorry. I think it's French or something.
It's French.
Yeah, les bains douches. I mean, it looks like it says douches.
It's not pronounced that way, I can assure you.
Yeah, I know. I know, but that's what it looks like. So, but it's LESBAINSDOUCHES, 18th December 1979.
Les Bains Douches, perhaps.
Touche.
Who knows?
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry to anybody who speaks French out there. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, we are uneducated in the language and not afraid to admit it.
We're uneducated? No.
In the language. In the language.
Yeah, I know. But this album is what I feel is the album people should go to. I really do. I just really like this one. There's something about this one that I just think it really captures not only the energy, it's a little less aggressive than the other album, but the quality of the performance and the recording itself is actually really good.
Yeah, I think that's where this album really shines. You know, you could argue day and night that maybe there was more energy on the other live album. But if you can't capture that properly, it's not enjoyable to listen to. And what this album does is it does a good job of capturing their live sound, you know?
Yep.
And that's all you really need out of a live album.
I really agree with that. I think that the vocals and stuff, yeah, with all these live albums, the vocals are pushed either way too low or way too high. I think this one, you know, his vocals are a little high on it, and I still think it sits where it kind of needs to.
Yeah.
It doesn't, you know, like, it doesn't really mesh the way that you would want it to necessarily, but...
It doesn't sound like the records, I'll say that.
Yeah.
But, you know, with that being said, I think that it's not distracting or...
Yeah.
It doesn't make the album unenjoyable.
Well, I'll say this compared with the other album is with the Preston live album is I would much rather hear the vocals than not hear the vocals or be fighting to hear it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
And I think this album actually has a really, really good sound, and it really draws me in. I will say though, there's this really weird thing of on Spotify and basically anywhere where this is like, you know, online where you can listen to it.
Yeah.
It has a really strange thing. This track listing is actually different than what's like listed on a lot of places like Wikipedia and a lot of official places for it.
Yeah.
It actually has a different track listing, and I'm just mentioning this because it's really crazy. So if you listen to this album on Spotify, you'll see. So that track listing is a little different. Like the ending songs, I think it's like track 10 to like 12 are different, and the last few songs are super distorted. And I've checked multiple versions of it, and the ending songs are just really distorted, and I have no idea why.
Could be partially because they drew from two different concerts to...
That's what I think it is.
No, it's confirmed that they pulled additional tracks from a separate concert.
Yeah, and it's really strange. So there's like two different versions of this album, that, at least as far as I'm aware of, and one of the versions has really, really ridiculously distorted songs at the end of it. And
yeah.
I don't know what's up with that, but I think the rest of the album is great. I think that both versions of the album have the same, like, I think first, like, 9 or 10 tracks.
Yeah.
So you're fine, but then there's some prints that have, like, these really crummy versions of other songs. So
yep.
Just be aware of that, I guess. But basically the songs that are great on this album overwhelm anything else that can be put at the end of it that are bad.
I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, but this is definitely my recommended live choice for Joy Division.
I would agree with you. You know, I have to say, I think this is one of the few episodes where we rarely agree on pretty much everything.
Yeah, Joy Division is an amazing band. It was really, really great band, and it sucks that we didn't get more. Like, it really does. I think we would have gotten some pretty damn good albums. I think they would have been a lot different than what they were already doing. You know, just because they grew a lot in a very small amount of time, and it sucks that we don't have more.
Yeah,
it really does. And but what we got is amazing. And the fact that we got New Order is great too. Like, that band's really awesome, and we're going to cover New Order eventually, obviously. But Joy Division has a special place in a lot of people's hearts for, you know, the relation of loneliness and, you know, heartache and all these different things. And you know what we barely talked about?
What?
Love Will Tear Us Apart.
There's a reason for that.
I just thought I'd mention that, just in case anybody was wondering what our opinion of that song is, just because it's their biggest song. Yes, it's on Substance. It's amazing. We hear it every time we go out anywhere that's even remotely goth.
I'm very tired of hearing it.
Yeah, but it's amazing. Like, I gotta give it credit. It's good. The reason that it's played out is because it's amazing. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not willing to refute that. Like, I definitely agree. Just I don't want to hear that song again.
So yeah, I think that this was it was really a joy to listen to these albums. Huh? Very good. Yeah. Okay. Well. Yeah.
No, it really was fun listening to these albums again and getting to kind of view them from a new perspective, perhaps.
Yeah.
Because I went into this kind of not expecting to enjoy it as much as I did, because I think, like a lot of people, I'm definitely guilty of having been burnt out on Joy Division. But I spent a long time away from Joy Division, and perhaps the break did me some good, because I would definitely enjoyed listening to the material for this episode, and I've enjoyed doing this episode, and I couldn't recommend these albums more.
Yeah, so go treat your disorder with some Joy Division to have an ideal for living, to get closer to people, to get unknown pleasures.
But you gotta have a car with a transmission.
Well, it gives me a lot of insight. Wait, what day is it? Oh, it's the Day of the Lords.
Well, she's lost control.
Oh, well, it's been decades. At least, oh god, I'm done. But yeah,
Yeah, let's stop.
I don't know why. Like, I just kind of felt compelled to do that. But yeah, so obviously, Joy Division is amazing. Tell us your opinions of Joy Division, and what you liked, and what you think of Unknown Pleasures. And I especially want to hear people's thoughts on, I don't know, the commonplace of where Joy Division stands in terms of music. Like, their image is almost seen as something bigger than their music now. And I wonder if people still have the idea of oversaturation that we have of it, where people, you see it everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, they're big enough that there's a biopic about them. So
yeah, Control, yeah, and we're gonna talk about that eventually too. The biopic, just in case anybody's wondering. We're gonna cover the movie.
Of course we will.
Yeah. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. This has been episode 23 of GothCast. I'm Dr. Sanders.
I'm Robbie Gore.
And GothCast is affiliated with The Belfry. Belfry, it's a great place to find anything related to goth that you would like. It's mostly a podcast network. It's a website of gothic podcasts, Gothification, Cemetery Confessions, The Requiem, which are all great podcasts and we really recommend.
They also have YouTube channels that they support, and just various gothic community and culture mediums. And so it's a great place to go for any kind of gothic media. And whether you're a veteran of the gothic community or you're someone that's just starting out, I think you could definitely find something for you on there.
Yeah, and you can find everything at www.thebelfry, that's BELFRY.RIP.
Yep.
And then as far as all of our GothCast plugs,
of course, we got to do them. All right. So we got Instagram, just GothCast. We got Facebook, GothCast. We have a YouTube channel, GothCast Space Video. Website where we host all of our episodes as well as our fashion posts and videos and various content is gothcastradio.com. No www, because who needs that? And we have an email, which is gothcastradio@gmail.com. And you can, of course, reach us on any of these mediums. We're usually very quick to respond and happy to address any comments or requests. And we'd love to hear from you guys. And lastly, we're on iTunes. It'd be cool if you guys could subscribe, if you guys use iTunes, or leave a review for us. Yeah. It's always nice. Yeah, that's pretty much social media.
Yep. All right. Stay spooky.